Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gents, welcome back to Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Mike Baldwin, retired, semi-retired Detective Mike Baldwin. Thanks for coming on the show.
Eric, it's good to be with you. I've been excited about talking to you, so it's finally here.
Yeah, welcome. So we got connected initially through our mutual friend, retired Sergeant John Kelly, and especially in your work with the Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. But we're here to talk about you today. We'll talk about how you got, connected with Lieutenant Colonel's work and helping him out. But I love, as we got to connect before we started recording, but I love what we've already kind of covered about leadership and leadership at whatever level you're at. We talked about how you found your career in detective work and really making an impact with the people that you trained and the people you work alongside. And that's what legacy is all about. And also lessons learned in the career and resilience and your pillars. But without me telling the story and like what I surmised, Mike, if you could please introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and what brought you into law enforcement.
I'm originally from Arizona. I spent most of my life in Arizona, thoroughly loved the desert. I went to college to be a teacher and a basketball coach. That's what I wanted to do. I thought I could help people, certainly help young people.
What do you want to teach?
I wanted primarily be in the sports aspect. So, physical education. That way I could start looking at who I wanted on the team and so forth,
scouting,
motivating them. And then kind of by default, a lot of PE teachers or history teachers. I was at a Christian school, so I taught a section of Bible as well. And so that was good. And I enjoyed that. I had a lot of good kids that I was able to coach and grow. And that was my first kind of take on leadership, as just getting better from year to year and working with those guys. I wanted them to get better. And so I wanted to be the best. They motivated me. Hopefully I motivated them. But a few years later, the school went in a different direction as far as leadership. And I thought the school might be closing down pretty soon. And so I didn't know what was going to be on the horizon for me. I wasn't thinking this necessarily at the time, but I look back at it now and how my career has gone. Sometimes as a Christian, I pray for God's will and his direction, and I look for an open door. And sometimes you might have an open door because something else shuts. And so in this particular case, something that I wanted to do, teaching and coaching, was being shut down. No fault my own, but I was being now moved into a different direction. And one of the other coaches, he had been a Phoenix police officer. He was one. And then one of the kids that I'd coached told me he was going to test for Phoenix PD. And I told him, hey, that's great. And he suggested that I test as well. I go, hey, why not? I'll see what it's all about. And so no preparation whatsoever. I mean, we got guys nowadays that'll train for 3 months and still fail the fitness test and can barely pass a written. It's a joke. And we've kind of dumbed it down, over the years. But this is back when 600 guys would test for 10 slots.
Yeah.
And so I took the written test, passed that. I remember it was on August, and at 2:00 in the afternoon, the guys that passed went out to the track and did the push-ups, sit-ups, and a 1.5 mile run, 105, 107 degrees outside.
Dang, yeah.
No training, but I was in basketball shape from coaching and smoked that, and just got in the background investigations and so forth, and polygraph and psych test. And then at that time, it was so competitive in the Valley, Maricopa County, around Phoenix, that some mentors of mine said, hey, you should test with several different agencies. Don't just put all your eggs in one basket. And so I got picked up with the Chandler Police Department. which is on
Yeah.
the east side of Phoenix, and went through the academy with them. I was a competitor in the academy. I'd never been in the military, but I grew up in a strict home, and so I thoroughly enjoyed it. Ended up being the class speaker at graduation, and that was a real honor because the class voted for me to speak on their behalf.
Says a lot. Yeah.
And then after a few months, I lived on the west side of the valley, and so the drive over an hour to get to work, and we had twins at home, young babies,
Wow.
and I lateraled to the west side of Phoenix to a city called Surprise to be closer to home.
Mhm.
And there I spent the next 21 years and worked a number of different roles and had some good times, had some bad times, ran into the politics of the police department. One of the hardest things about the job, in my opinion, but I thoroughly loved dealing with the public, dealing with bad guys, because I knew where I stood, I knew where they stood. And it was almost like a sport. It was competition. It
Yeah.
was me against them sometimes.
Yeah, that's very much a thing. You covered a lot of ground. And just for a recap, how old were you when you came into the police academy and got hired?
I was older than some, but not as old as some others. I was 30. So
Yeah.
I got my start a little later than some. But I also think that helped me too.
Yeah.
Um, Going to your first domestic violence, I wasn't a 21-year-old cop. I was a 30-year-old married man with kids.
Yeah.
So different story.
Oh, that's so much a thing. I share my story oftentimes. I came out of recruiting prior to my current assignment, and oftentimes anyone over like 27, 28 asks if they're too old. And I'm like, no, you're ideal of anything, like, your late 20s to mid to late 30s, even early
Yeah.
40s, like people that take care of themselves, like, why not? And you live life. And
You have a little life experience too. So
yeah, no doubt.
you're not a novice at decision making. You've seen a little bit of the world. So I think it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had that coach teacher background, which is very much leadership. I love how you highlight that because a lot of people, especially the younger individuals, when they're coming into the job, they ask about how to develop their leadership. And I like to start with yourself, right? Like, ownership is leadership of yourself. Lead yourself. Like, choose and be decisive in the actions you take, that they're being constructive towards where you want to go, who you want to be. And then, like, it's literally the circle, like, build out your circles. Like, who's around you that you can lead, right? Who can you lead in your family? Even you're a son or a daughter with no kids, like, yeah, you can lead your parents in a positive way. Like, that's leading up, which we all have to hopefully get experience with. But yeah, I love how you are able to illustrate that with your prior vocation, because I mean, that's ultimately like some of the most effective cops are people that treat it like a coaching type of role, where you're encouraging, kids that are getting into bad decisions on the street, or you're encouraging your peers, right?
Yeah. And I think it did help too. When I became a field training officer, I've been teaching, I've been coaching before. So this is what a field training officer should do: teach and coach and make this new officer a solid police officer. When I became a patrol sergeant, I thoroughly loved that role. And being in charge of a squad and getting up every day for briefing. And this is what I did as a patrol sergeant. I never sat down in a briefing. I always stood. Um, a lot of the sergeants sat down at the time, cracked jokes, and so forth. I had the youngest squad on the department, being the newest sergeant. So I was working weekend graveyards and with the youngest squad. And so I wanted to train them. And so every day was kind of like I was in the coaching arena
Mm,
where all the team is around me and I'm given, hey, this is what we're going to do during the game. And so I would do that, with my squad. And we'd put up different scenarios on the board, role play. Hey, if there's a shooting at the Circle K tonight and you're the first officer on scene and this is what you see, what do you do?
mm-hmm.
And put this officer on the spot. And I'm getting them to make decisions. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know anything about Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, the bulletproof mindset, all that. I didn't know. But I knew that just from sports, you had to scout, you had to plan ahead, and you had to compete. And
Mm-hmm.
there were times I got beat. I have a degree in losing. I lost more games, that first year than I won. But then the next year we got better. And then by the third year, we won a state championship. So I was proud of that.
Yeah.
So same thing with my squad. And I would force them to make decisions. Okay, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do next? And what we teach now with the Bulletproof Mind is you can't go anywhere fast where your mind hasn't been.
Yeah.
So if all of a sudden there's a hot tone on the radio of a school shooting and you've never even thought about a school shooting in your mind, you've never been in the school building, you don't even know where the entrances are,
Yep.
you're going to react so much slower than somebody who's played these reps in their mind ahead of time. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab my go bag out of the car. I know I have a couple extra mags in that. I have a tourniquet in there. I have a flashlight, some gloves, whatever you have in your go bag. I'm going to sling that on my shoulder. I'm going to grab my rifle and I'm heading for that, door.
Yeah.
And make a decision that I'm going to enter and save lives. I think that's part of good leadership. And we've seen stories, we've heard stories in our country of situations that didn't go that way. And it was
Absolutely.
lack
Yeah.
of leadership and it was fear. And fear paralyzed people to make no decision. So I didn't always make the right decisions in my police career, but I did make a decision. When I got on scene, something was going to happen. I evaluated it as to what's reasonable in this situation. What's my
Yeah.
reasonable use of force? Could this pass the smell test or the headline test or something like that? And we're going to take action. I had other supervisors that were scared of their own shadow
Mm-hmm.
and they'd get on scene and do nothing.
Yeah.
And they had to call the lieutenant. The lieutenant was scared. He didn't know what to do. So he'd call the commander. What should I do? You're out on scene. Make a decision.
Yep. It doesn't have
That's
to
why
be the best, right? Like,
that's why you got in that role.
yeah. Yeah. It has to be a good decision. Like, not, what's that saying about the perfection or being the enemy of good or something to that effect, right? Like,
I'm not sure.
okay. Essentially, it's like, yeah, we go for perfection, it'll be to our detriment and we won't be able to settle for like a very good response. Yeah, no, you've covered a lot of ground as far as there's certainly a lot of parallels that are clear from coaching. And you think about that traditional kind of like, you're going over tape, and like that's certainly a very relevant free tool that we all have access to. So regardless of your training budget, regardless of how active or not active your jurisdiction is, like you can watch tape from all over the nation and see these really tough calls where cops did the most amazing response or the less than ideal response, right? You mentioned nationally, yes, like so active shooters or school shootings. Unfortunately, there's two recent of significant events where we gotta let that sit in our gut and recognize not only how that makes us feel, but beyond that, more constructively, what we're going to do so that it will never happen where we work, right? And so that's internalizing all the things you're saying, right? Train your brain, which is what I'm hearing, these carryovers to, hey, I may not experience every type of scenario in my career. Certainly I won't experience every type, and we can all hope that it doesn't happen to our community, that bad day. But should it happen, I know that I've mentally gone there. I've visualized like all the things that, people know from sports as far as like how you elevate human or team performance is you have to prepare. And a lot of that is mental, correct?
Yeah, I think so. And I sat in my car many days on patrol, looked at a scenario and said, hey, if this happened, what would I do? Where would I go for cover? Who would I call? What would I do next? And so those mental reps help you be faster in the game when the bullets are alive, so to speak, and help you make good, timely decisions.
Yeah. The other thing that I focus on from, what you shared is that, you talk about losing as a coach. And I mean, to some that are, I would say, not resilient, would say that, yeah, a loss is a loss. But for those that want to build and learn, like losing is an opportunity to learn, right? It's a lesson. And so if you have all those L's in the L column, like those are all very tangible lessons. And I think most people can resonate with this, whether it's sports or otherwise, like their failures or their losses, like there has to be something gained from that, right? Or else it's a total waste.
I think the bad guys typically win more than the good guys. I think, let's just say a guy's been arrested 5 times. You know how many times he got away with something before he got
Sure.
arrested?
Yeah.
It's like someone who drives drunk. They say the average DUI person drives hundreds of times a year impaired before the one time that they get stopped. So what I did was which was different than some. When I had the bad guy and we were done with the interview and, whatever, he's going to go to jail pretty soon, I would sit and talk to him and go, man, I stopped you before, last week, and I knew you had drugs and stuff like that, but I couldn't find him. Where did you guys hide him? Because you got one up on me. And I'm building his ego and confidence. And
Mm-hmm.
then he would
That's the
start
thing.
sharing certain things with me and sharing stories. And then I'd be like, what about so-and-so? I mentioned another gang member or person down the street. Somebody maybe he didn't like, oh, I hate that guy, and I'm like, great. Where does he hide his dope? And he would tell me, oh, right up underneath the dash, there's this little cavity he has in his car. So next time I'd pull that car over, I knew right where to go. And so by talking with the bad guys, it helped me be better at my craft. But if I had never humbled myself to talk to the bad guy, I wouldn't have got the edge.
Yeah, there's so much advantage to that, and like one is just leveling, right? It being human. You called it being humble, and yeah, that's. I remember what it was like to be that new officer that I was super judgmental. I was self righteous in a lot of ways, right? I was
Well,
like, well,
you're
you're
totally black and white. You're right. They're
yeah,
wrong.
yeah, and
That's how
like
I was.
yeah, and like to be more, I suppose, like live more life, especially through the vein and the lens of being a cop and just seeing like how life interacts with all of us and how we all interact with life differently. But like some people got a crappy hand, and not to make an excuse, but at the same time, I didn't have everything go amazingly in my life. But at the same time, I had a lot of people looking out for me. I had a lot of positive influences and resources and all these things just to say that, hey, if I can't connect and even if it's through my teeth, like stroke your ego a little bit to get some sort of confession rather than lecturing you as a 20 something year old, like where does that get you?
Yeah, it's building a rapport. It's learning to be a bit empathetic because when I first started my career, I wasn't that way either. And the bad guys, they lied constantly and so forth. But then I began to think, and this is the mind shift changed. What if I had grown up in a different home than I
Mm-hmm.
did? What if I had got a taste of drugs that then hooked me immediately, and then I went on this spiral downhill and to where I'm doing what they're doing? And I'm thankful that I didn't go down that road and I didn't have those experiences. And so I began to be a little bit more empathetic with them. They're still going, it's still a competition. I have a job to do. I'm going to take you to jail. You committed a crime. You burglarized somebody's car or their house. I
Yeah.
can't stand for that. I can't give a free pass, but I can somewhat understand it. Doesn't make it
Yeah.
right. And I'm not giving you an excuse for it, but treating them like a human being and with respect. And it came back to me 10 times over with confessions. I can say this honestly, Eric. There were times that because of how I treated the bad guy, that other officers would arrest the suspect on a different shift or when I wasn't even in patrol anymore. I was in investigations. And this guy said, I'm not going to talk to anybody except for Detective Baldwin.
That says a
Um,
lot. Yeah.
and they're like, why? Because he's the only one I trust.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I put him in jail the last time, but at least I was kind to him when I
Yep.
did it. And so he remembered that. And so he confesses again. I treat him good, get him a soda, get him a cigarette or something, but he still goes to jail.
Yeah.
And I think it's a win-win for me.
Yeah, I think that's the twist of like public service and how like the old generation that I was a part of, like I was a part of that culture where it's like, no, you'll get respect when you give respect. But we're the professionals. It's our job. Like we can give respect whether or not we receive it.
And not everybody was open to that type of thing. Some people were jerks no matter what you did to them, And so guess what? I didn't waste my time with those people.
Yeah.
But a person who would humble themselves basically to my authority, and now that I'm being kind to them, and we could have a conversation like you and I are having right now, I'll sit and talk with you for an hour straight. And a lot of guys wouldn't do that. They wouldn't give the bad guy the time of day because, oh, he's lying about something. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I started asking questions about his life. how's your son doing? Well, he's with his mom right now. Well, why isn't he with you? Well, because you're on drugs and you're not being responsible. Why don't you take care of yourself and get back in your son's life? All right, Baldwin, that's what I'm going to work on doing.
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe you made a difference to one person.
Yeah, literally sometimes just telling someone, like, sometimes I feel like people in this position, I mean, that's a low place to be. Like, you're in handcuffs, you're in the back of a car, and I cannot relate to that in that way. But no one at times seems to be in their corner. But just to be talking to someone who's essentially in a crisis situation, whether or not they broke the law, but they're dealing with the police, which isn't a great place to be oftentimes. But to say, hey man, like, you understand that you have some options. You understand that your kid wants to see you. No, they don't. I was like, dude, every kid wants to see their dad. I don't care. Like things can be repaired. Relationships can be repaired. Like, think about, you don't have to answer me. This is more rhetorical, man. Just chew on it. But like, what's that going to be like 10 years from now if the thing stops now and you get on the right track and you go to the classes that are going to follow, this whole court proceeding? I don't know what that looks like, but you may know, right, where it's going. If you stay on track versus if you keep doing this, where is it going to be in 10 years? And where does that leave your kid, with your relationship? Or are you in your kid's life at all? Or what impact does that have? And there have been conversations like that, years ago, when you could tell it sat with someone, because they kind of just sit and they're just chewing on it. They're not defensive. They're just kind of hit with it. They have to marinate on that.
This was I just thought of it as you were talking, one of the stories that, where you made an impact in someone's life and you had no idea and you never thought this day would happen. But there was this woman, and drug user. She was hooked on pills, and years ago, and she'd be out with the wrong crowd. She'd probably prostitute to get her pills for free, whatever. I arrested her so many times, and she hated me. She screamed. She cussed me out. And I got tired of seeing her. And finally, you stacked enough cases against her, and she not only went to jail, but she ended up going to prison for a few months. And one day I got a call from her husband. And I had gone over to her husband's house probably 10 times during all these arrests, and just talked to him. And he's like, what can I do? And I've tried to put her in rehab and this and that. He was a big old biker type guy, long hair, ponytail and stuff like that. Kind of a scary dude. I probably shouldn't have been over at his house by myself anyway, but I just sat and talked with him. And one day I got a phone call from him, and he's like, can you come over to the house? And I hadn't heard from him in months because his wife's been in prison. So I thought about it, and I decided to go over there, and his wife was there. She got out of prison, and she gave me the biggest hug, and she said, thank you for being such a jerk to me. And I hated you, but you hounded me. You kept arresting me, and I needed to go to prison so I could get clean off this pill addiction. And I never thought I would hear something like that. That was amazing. And by doing my job, doing it well, not giving up, it did make a difference in someone's life. It doesn't always work out that way, but it did for her, and I never heard from her again. So I assume she stayed clean.
Yeah. That's such a big deal. And so many times I think it's helpful for all cops to reflect on this a little bit and give themselves some credit, because we oftentimes don't get the end result, right? We don't really know how things happen. But we have to believe, and we have to know that so many bad situations are being prevented by the sheer fact that we're out there doing the job, right? It's not always everyone you catch. A lot of times it's the things you deter by sheer presence, by the conversations you're having, right? By having those mentoring sessions with a young or older individual, right? A prior episode, Detective Tom Reiner from my department, but such a testament, because I remember as a young patrol cop seeing him on patrol, and he would be at the rear compartment, and he would be talking to people for so long, right? Every time someone was handcuffs, and then he became that guy, similar to, I think what you shared, is that people get detained or you arrive with someone arrested and they're always like, hey, where's, like they only want to talk to him because he truly cared. He gave a dang, and he took the time, and he tried to have those kind of mentory, kind of parental conversations, right? Hey, not just like lecturing and judgy, kind of like I alluded to, like at the younger Eric, but like, hey, I see the track you're on. I've been doing this long enough. Do you see where it's going? I do. Here's what you got to keep in mind here. Like, and usually it's people are receptive to some degree, right? But it took that persistence, and you have to know that some of those conversations flipped, and you don't get a phone call, you don't get a letter later. But for him, he had a very iconic example where at his retirement party, there was a gal I didn't recognize, and I saw a couple people talking to her, and later it was very much like, hey, I like to introduce this person that's been a big part of my life. She was an addict. She was in and out of jail, property crimes, all, the 9 felonies. And when she said her name, or he said her name, I remember him talking about this name. Like, I didn't know, 10 years later, this is what she looked like. But to have someone's life saved, I mean, that's such a big deal. And I think it's just like, you can't give up on individuals. It's not to say you have to bear that emotional burden, but you got to show up, and it's worth it.
It is worth it, Eric. And I co-authored a little booklet with Colonel Grossman that follows his Bulletproof Mind presentation, and I write a story in there about making a difference, to that one. And a lot of police officers will go through their career and say, "Is it worth it? Did I even make a difference? I didn't make a dent, in the drug traffic and the property crimes. Did I even make a difference?" And I can say 100%, if you go out and do your job every day the right way, you will make a difference. You do make a difference in someone's life. I didn't think of it all the time while I was doing the job, but since I've been retired the last 2 years, some stories have come back to my mind. And, I remember cleaning up a suicide scene where a man shot himself in front of his wife, and she's elderly, and her life now is torn up and upside down, and she doesn't know what to do. And we go in as police officers and we treat it clinically. We've seen suicides too many times.
Mm-hmm.
And then we walk out, just leave the lady, as it is, because suicide's not a crime. But instead, I stayed on scene, and myself and another officer, and we cleaned up the blood. We wiped down the walls, mopped the floor, got some bleach out. The next day, I went back to her house. Didn't have to. I wasn't called there. Just went back to her house, sat at her kitchen table, had a Diet Coke with this elderly lady, and she's asking me all kinds of questions about what to do next, who to call. And I can say, yeah, I made a difference for that woman. And nobody knows about it. I didn't get a medal from the police department, hey, good job. I know I have peace in my heart that I did the right thing for the right reasons. And that's important.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and kind of spinning off what you said, but this job can be such a magnifier to good deeds, right? It's to say that you don't have to be a first responder to be doing good stuff out in the community. And that comes off of a flip of so many people in the recruiting game when they're a candidate, when they're testing their applicant. Why do you want to do this job? Well, I want to help people. I'm like, well, you should be doing that today anyway. Like, tell me how you help people now, and tell me in what way. Like, I'm challenging and inviting. I'm not like shutting down, but like, in what way do you need to be a cop to help people in the way you want? And usually it does go to this aspect of, being on the front lines or protecting people in a physical way or getting after violent crime. It's something true to their story and their impact, right? In the past, I've reflected that I feel like police work is an accelerant to exposure of the human condition, and that works in both ways. That's good and bad, right? So it can help, a negative person get super negative. It can help a resilient, positive person get even more positive. And we have to be intentional about that, right? Like the way that these things are influencing us.
Yeah, and you ebb and flow throughout your career. It's not a constant high and it's not a constant down, but we do get jaded in this job pretty quick. You get discouraged pretty quick when you arrest somebody, and next thing you know, they're let out, and you're like, I didn't even get my paperwork done, and this guy's back out on the street offending again. This makes no sense to me. But
it's so true now.
I still have to do my job, and evil triumphs when good men do nothing. So if police agencies around the country right now are going, you know what, our hands are tied. We can't do anything. Nobody gets prosecuted. You got to look yourself in the mirror. And you took an oath when you took this job. And does that oath still stand or does it not stand? I'm coming up on 30 years of being married. And I took an oath when I got married. We've had highs and we've had lows, my wife and I, over the years. When we have a bad situation, do we just quit and say, hey, I'm out of here? Or do we fight for it because it's the right thing to do? And so by God's grace, we've been married 30 years, have 2 adult children. The police career is the same way. You took an oath. Maybe you need to recommit yourself. Maybe you need to reevaluate and say, is this job still for me? Because if you can't do it to that standard, don't look for the retirement. You might as well get out now, because better no cop than a bad cop.
Yep.
If you're not doing it for the right reasons, I say, get out. But there's so many good people that are doing this job, and we need more of them. We need some to recommit themselves. And you know what? I've been off the horse for the last year or two. I need to get back on and do what I'm supposed to do. That's okay. It's people that have a problem with their diet, go to the gym, work out, stop eating so much junk food or whatever. It's okay to have a bad day, but don't let that bad day turn into a bad week, a bad month, a bad year. And then start making excuses for it, because you control your attitude. I used to blame, some of the command staff. I can't stand these people. They're losers. They are half the cop that I am.
Yeah,
but
it's fair. It's oftentimes true.
Why am I looking at them?
Yeah,
they could care less about what I'm doing. So
sure.
I need to focus on, as a Christian, I need to do a good job. As a police officer, I need to do a good job to stay safe. As a leader in the department, meaning I've been here a while and I'm training younger detectives, I need them to look at me and go, hey, this is the right way to do it. I need to be a good mentor. And I think when I started doing that, I became whole. I became fulfilled as a police officer.
Yeah. There's so much that I love about what you said, and kind of zigzag around and try to remember the different points. But one of them was, with the attitude of, well, what's the point? And yes, we've all had our bad days. We all have our cynical cycles, especially with legislation and things as of late. It does feel so binding, and like the handcuffs, that's a common, like I've said that many times, right? Like, hey, we're handcuffed. Like, but how does that sound to the civilian? How does that sound to the resident, where you're like, oh, like, we can't do this, we can't do that. It's like, okay, what can you do? And that's a recent conversation. I had on a different podcast where it was a civilian that works with law enforcement and helps train law enforcement, firearms, and tactical athleticism, stuff like that. But as a business owner, as a resident, you're like, okay, like, what am I supposed to do? And there are things we can do, right? It might not be, hey, the county prosecutor doesn't want to take this at this level, but I can refer it to the municipal, right? Or I can do extra patrol. Hey, I can tell my buddy, and between calls, maybe we can, sit outside your business, just give some extra presence. Like, these are all very much tangible things we can hold. And I love how you connected it to the obligation, right? Like, sometimes, too often, we've heard, and I'm sure every agency has one or some that say, yeah, like, I'd love to go do something else, but I'm my retirement, and I'm not going to make as much money. But they're clearly unplugged. They're clearly disengaged. But we as a culture need to say, hey, we all have our bad days. Like, I'm not willing to accept that for myself, and I'm not willing to accept it for you. Like, I'll bring you up. You're my buddy. Like, hey, let's go get involved again, to uplift people, not condemn them. But if they're not on board, I think that we owe it to ourselves as a profession and a culture to say, hey, man, like, that's not okay. Like, not to be cheesy, but yes, we did swear an oath, and it's not to say you have to do this job forever. But if you've had your time, and like I've said so many countless times, like, hey, whether you do 5 years, 15, 2, or 20, thank you for your service. If you did it the right way, you made a difference. But when it doesn't serve you anymore, when it doesn't resonate with you and your family and the things you need to do for your life, then you need to move on.
I think this is one of those jobs that if you can't go all in, you probably shouldn't do it. There's too much at stake. And that's my personal belief and opinion. And again, like you had mentioned to the citizens, they're counting on us. So many of them will go, "Hey, I can never do your job. I don't have the patience for it. I could not put up with people yelling at me, screaming at me, and being there for people on their worst day." But, if you flip the coin, man, I am one of those people that can do that and I can handle that and so forth. That's kind of cool. And that's
Yeah.
why in some circles in our country, it's still a revered occupation and position. And what we need to do, the pendulum, hopefully in our country, is going to swing backwards. The whole defund the police,
Yep.
let's get mad at the police. I think we've proven that that doesn't work, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not the answer at all. And so, one day without law enforcement in our country, we will have absolute anarchy. The
Yep.
thin blue line is holding peace in our country, and so it's a tough thing sometimes, because you've been around a long time too, so the politics of the job, and you talk about people that stab you in the back that wear in the same uniform you do, and it's like that probably happens in probably most professions.
Yeah, it's sad, but it's fair to recognize, hey, this isn't just cops. But it's not just government. Yeah, private sector, like people are throwing each other under the bus. It is to say we all have an opportunity to be more positive and collaborative in like what is the mission, what is our team focus, right? Because ultimately, yeah, the thin blue line that gets twisted around so many different ways. But yeah, like
Yes, it gets taken out of context a lot.
yeah, it's so. But yeah, just to reaffirm, like yeah, as Mike said, like I agree, like it could be a symbol of like, hey, we have this border between anarchy and order, which most people, regardless of your politics, regardless of your station in life and what you're trying to do, but most people want a safe community to raise their family, do the things they want to do, which lawlessness does not allow, right? So and the irony too, I think sometimes, is that people assume all these things about cops, and most cops, in my experience, they generally pretty like hands off, just kind of leave everyone alone unless they're hurting somebody else, which is kind of funny, I think, when people put all these labels on us.
We have a job to do. We're getting paid to do that job. Do you want to do it at the highest level that you possibly can? So if you're on patrol, be the best patrol officer. If you're in motors, man, be the best motor that you can be. If you're a school resource officer, man, I wouldn't want to be one, but good for you if you do. You can
Yeah.
impact so many lives in a positive way. You're not going to save all those kids at that school. There's a lot of kids that are just punks and they hate you and don't care for you, but there's a lot that are looking up to you. And so you
Hmm.
never know who's watching you. And that's would be my encouragement to the listeners today to just to keep going.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
Colonel
100%.
Grossman, he
Because
says that, we
yeah,
need more of what you have to give.
no, I think that's huge. And just to go off like a recent episode with Sarah Shendy, she's a sergeant in the Midwest. But as we were talking, we were recognizing, yeah, we can have a lot of impact in the interactions we have. But kind of one thing that we expanded on was, yeah, maybe you can't get through to every kid. Even if you're picking and choosing your battles, you're focusing on a few. Like others are watching, right? So even also not outwardly giving up on that kid because he keeps messing up, being respectful still, right? Hey, like you don't want to hear it from me. Okay, but I still respect you. I still see potential. I'm going to go talk to this kid. Like that might not change in the moment. You might never see that, but that could help pave the way for the next cop that talks to him, right? The
That's
next,
right.
if it's a mistake or it's just an interaction. And I think too often it's hard to remember this, but when we have an interaction with one person in the public, I mean, how many people are watching? Not just because of your body cam, but like how many people are literally watching from down the block just because it's super obvious every time there's a black and white or every time there's a cop out on foot. Everyone's looking around, seeing what's going on and how you're interacting, what your tone sounds like, what your body language says. I'm saying be safe, but absolutely people are watching and they're forming an opinion about all police based on what they see you doing or not doing right then.
Yeah, command presence is the number one use of force. I mean, it's the first thing people see. I'm not a big guy, but when I showed up on scene, I was in charge. I was going to make decisions. Sometimes you start up kind of high escalated and then you kind of de-escalate the
Hmm.
situation. I would say the same thing for people, police officers, as far as their physical appearance, working out and staying in shape. if you look like a soup sandwich in a uniform, your
Yeah.
respect level from the public is already taken a hit before you even get there.
Yeah.
So take care of yourself, look squared away, and that's half the battle, I think.
Yeah. 100%. Now, I want to ask you about the transition from retirement to semi-retirement, I'll call it. Obviously you're still working on truth, working with the lieutenant colonel. What was that like, and what feedback would you give active officers, because they have to consider it at some point, but also those approaching retirement, because that becomes such a theme of this meaningful identity, but how that could be difficult to grapple with taking the next chapter of your life.
So yes, I can only obviously speak to my story. So a couple years prior to retirement, other guys my age were starting to retire, and um, a lot of them were looking for the easiest job that could pay the most money, a job that I could sit and do nothing. I didn't want to go that route. I still wanted to be motivated, to be challenged. I got my master's degree in business. I had all these ideas of how I would use it, and I applied all kinds of different places, and none of those came to fruition. It just didn't happen. But I saw an ad for Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. I didn't know him. I hadn't been to any of his presentations, but I had heard the name. So I reached out to him, and we emailed back and forth. He emailed me a series of questions. Then we got on a Zoom call. And then I went to visit him where he lives near St. Louis. And we talked, and he offered me a job. Since coming on board with him, I helped rebrand his company. We changed the name to Grossman on Truth. Did some social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, stuff like that, and just to kind of get the word out. And I'm helping build the brand, and he's been able to speak a little bit more internationally. He's gone to Canada. He's going to go to Ukraine here pretty soon.
Yeah, I heard that.
He's scheduled to go down to Trinidad, Tobago. Got a possible documentary in the works and things of that nature. So that's exciting. That's motivating me. And obviously, he's the face of the franchise. I'm behind the scenes, but I'm learning a lot from him. But I'm able to use my business degree to interact with people. I'm talking to chiefs of police, wing commanders at Air Force bases, people that want to have the colonel in, people
Mhm.
that I never would have spoken to before had I
For
not
sure.
been in this role. This opportunity to speak with you, being on a podcast and being your guest, you never would have heard of me before had I not had this relationship with Colonel Grossman. So it's been good for me. It's been a challenge, and we'll see, what the next challenge is down the road, because I don't want to ever get status quo or stagnant. I do want to be where the Lord wants me to be. I want to be a place where I can make a difference. We just talked
Yeah.
about that earlier. So even in this role, it's amazing to me. I've been on a few podcasts, and I've received a few emails, and people said, "Hey, I heard your story." And one podcast, I was talking about bitterness and how I got bitter doing this job. And somebody said, "Hey, that resonated with me." And so I was able to help somebody, and that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been able to have a few speaking opportunities along the way. I spoke at Liberty University. That was pretty cool, talking to their criminal justice students about reputation and having a good name. So I'm excited.
Oh, that's fantastic. I truly appreciate you spending the time with me and us, the listeners, because there is so much that you've shared through your experience, and a little, we talked a little bit about legacy before we started recording, and so maybe that's a good place to end as you continue to find purpose and thrive. One thing I want to focus on is the fact that you surrender. What I hear is this faithful surrender to what your worldly, universal, I suppose, existence is for. At the same time, it's not resigning agency. It's not resigning to that where you're just going to be a passive bystander. To be able to spread this positive message and this positive training to so many cops and military personnel and on. But at the same time, this challenge, right? This is a new role, and I really appreciate that. And I think that in the context of speaking about first responder survival beyond retirement, it's like you got to keep grinding, you got to keep growing. And that's where we see these terrible statistics with cops that, granted, probably aren't taking great care of themselves through their career and then retire, and then they lose purpose, and then they just don't have, literal purpose to continue living.
So again, knowing your purpose and knowing your cause. If you retire from this job, it doesn't matter what you do. You could volunteer. You don't have to be in a paid role, but
Yeah.
do something that has purpose and a cause. And I could see that in this job. People will send in emails and say, "Hey, Colonel Grossman, you did this presentation and I was about to kill myself and I had my gun in my mouth and I remembered what you said." And I'm like, "Wow, you saved somebody's life and you don't even know who they are."
Mm.
That is mission. That is purpose. And you can find that if you look for it. And if you look for it, you'll find it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that'll keep you motivated. That'll keep you younger, hopefully. And it's a good example to others who are still watching you. I have my kids; they're grown now, but I'm still their dad. I still want to set a good example for them.
Hmm.
I'm not just I'm done with police work. I'm just gonna. Even if I were doing nothing, I would still be doing something. I would have a hobby. I would
Yeah.
be in woodworking or doing something with purpose.
One thing I want to focus in on too, I was thinking about it as you spoke about it. I'm glad it's popped back into my mind. But when we talk about the oath of this job, this profession, you also talked about your oath to your wife. And this is something I reflect on lately, is that the more we say something, the more we potentially breathe it into existence. And we say marriage is hard. And we say law enforcement marriage is harder and the divorce rates are high. We say this. I've said it innumerable times. But I want to pause now and say, we need to say that and we can't stop without adding on, but we can do it, like with intention, with connection. I didn't take an oath to put my wife second. I took an oath to uphold my marriage and level with her and love her unconditionally, right? I took a public oath and one recognized by the government. And so I say that all to say, for those of our community that have divorced, it's not to throw shade, but it's more for the people that are in their current relationship, or they're moving towards, or they're going to get married at some point. We got to put family first, because family can too easily take a backseat to the stressors of this job and the trauma you bring home. And so I just want to say, let's challenge that difficult notion. I mean, we don't shy away from things that are difficult. So we have to have this abundance mindset that it's going to be okay and we can work through it. And that's kind of just what I wanted to reflect on as you promote that positive example, as you did.
No, I agree with you. I've been guilty of that throughout my career. When you go home, your wife's been with the kids all day, and she asks how your day was, and you've seen 3 dead bodies and so forth. It's just a normal day. Well, it's not a normal day. She actually wanted to know about my day. I was able to talk to her and tell her a lot of the things. I had another detective partner. He never told his wife anything. And so I don't think that's good either. My wife wanted to know genuinely. And then, oh, wow, I can't believe that. I'm glad it was you and not me. Just because something gets hard, you don't quit. There's only one thing wrong with quitting. It makes you a quitter. It's neat to see people who have been married 50, 60 years and grow old together, and they finish each other's sentences, so to speak, and they start to look like each other, kind of. And
Yeah, isn't that funny?
it's neat, and it's sad, obviously, when they pass, but they have a legacy that they were together during good times, bad times. They were a good example to their children. And so, like you said, a lot of police officers, it's almost built into our culture. Hey, you're going to get a divorce and blah, blah. It doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to become an alcoholic either. Those are choices that you make. And if something does happen like that in your life and you do get a divorce, and you do start to become an alcoholic, get help. If you get remarried again, get some marriage counseling and make this a great marriage. If you're medicating with alcohol, get help, stop, get better, and move on. Just because we had a defeat in our life, we don't quit. I told you I had a degree in losing. I lost more basketball games, than I won some years. I didn't quit. It's like, man, it motivated me to get better, to face my competition. So I would apply that to this job as well.
Yeah, I love that. Let's turn those L's into lessons. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate your time and your shared wisdom. Where can folks get in contact with you and see what you're working on next?
My email is mike@grossmanontruth.com, and that's the easiest. And then you can certainly go to our website. I kind of handle Colonel Grossman's social media. That's what I do. I don't have a whole lot on my own. I'm on LinkedIn if somebody wants to find me on LinkedIn. Eric, it was good talking to you. This hour went by very fast.
It went super fast. It always does.
So stay safe. Keep doing what you're doing to help spread the word, and positive mental outlook for officers is great.
Yeah, thanks so much, sir. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.